On February 1st, 1968, South Vietnamese General Nguyen Loan was about to make an almost impromptu decision that would change the public perception of the Vietnam War at home. In the middle of the street, in the middle of the day, he raised his .38 Special Smith & Wesson and executed Nguyễn Văn Lém. Hundreds of thousands of people died in this war, but what made Lem's death special was that Associated Press photographer Eddie Adams captured the exact moment the bullet fired by General Loan entered the head of Lem. That picture, the one we all know, where Loan, a skinny, thuggish-looking man, kills Lem with seemingly no hesitation or remorse, just another day on the job, while his soldiers watch for entertainment. That photo became universally known when it was syndicated everywhere. The photo went on to win the 1969 Pulitzer Prize for photography. There's a high likelihood that you know this photograph, as it's still one of the few lasting images of the war in Vietnam. If you haven't seen it, it's in the show notes. If you're like me, you're abhorred that the general was executing Lem in this way. It's not that Loan just looks like a thug. What makes it worse is that Lem looks like a helpless peasant. He's wearing ragged civilian clothes, he's short and disheveled, and he's clearly already been roughed up, as he's dressed with a bloody lip. So that's the story I believed. That's the story most people believe. That's the narrative most people believe. But that narrative is wrong. Just prior to that picture being taken, Nguyễn Văn Lém, a member of the Communist Viet Cong, which you wouldn't know because he was in his civilian attire, had barbarically slaughtered South Vietnamese Lieutenant Colonel Nguyen Ton, his wife, and their 5 children, and Tuan's 80-year-old mother. He did so by cutting their throats in their own home. One child miraculously survived after being shot in the arm, thigh, and skull, their 9-year-old son. That son held his mother for 2 hours as she lay dying in his arms. Context matters. Without the context, Loan, the tall, skinny general, is the evil one. Loan is the cold-blooded murderer. The photograph, and more importantly the narrative, never told the other side of the story. Context matters. Now we can argue whether or not what he did was still wrong, but the point remains. He wasn't the savage killing an innocent man as the photo leads you to believe. In fact, photographer Eddie Adams went on to say 2 lives were destroyed, and I was getting paid for it. I was a hero. Elaborating further, he said, 2 people died in that photograph. The general killed the Viet Cong, and I killed the general with my camera. Loan lost his leg later on in the war and was treated at Walter Reed in Bethesda, Maryland. He eventually settled down in Northern Virginia, opening and operating a restaurant in the D.C. suburbs. But the photographer Adams' worries were constant reality. Political actors with an agenda constantly tried to deport him. Other troublemakers constantly showed up at his door with threats. President Jimmy Carter knew the truth, not the narrative, and acted on it. When INS tried to deport him, Carter blocked it, stating, "Such historical revision was folly." Narratives lacking context have real-world consequences. This photograph would fuel countless anti-war demonstrations and affect overall sentiment of the war at home. This isn't a value judgment on the war in Vietnam. It's a deconstruction of a narrative and a material proof point of why it's so important to get the context of a narrative before taking action on it. Again, real-world consequences. There is one bright spot in this anecdote. The 9-year-old boy in our story, who wouldn't be denied life from Lem's 3 bullets, grew up to become the first Vietnamese Rear Admiral in the U.S. Navy. Nguyen Nguyen was taken in by his uncle, and our Navy and Marines personally helped him escape after the fall of Saigon. Nguyen has served in the United States Navy for 27 years. The moral of the story is, always, always, always stop and ask yourself, what's the context of this narrative? This photograph won the Pulitzer Prize. It haunted Loan decades later. It's one of the lasting images of the war. I had no idea what the context of this story was before doing this research. I had always assumed Loan was ruthlessly murdering this peasant. The context, and more importantly the truth, tell a completely different story. Ask yourself, what narratives do you believe that if asked for the context, you wouldn't be able to provide? Only then can we get closer to the truth. Thanks for listening to the Narrative Monopoly podcast. This week's episode, Deconstructing the Narrative, is something I plan to do more often based on the feedback. Also, I haven't asked in a while, but please leave a written 5-star review. I know for a fact there are now more of you who tune in each week than have left a review. So do your civic duty. We'll be back next week with a guest as usual, and see you next time.